They thought it was just an old family portrait, until someone counted the fingers. What investigators discovered hidden beneath that house would uncover decades of missing children, secret surgeries, and a nightmare nobody in Black Hollow was prepared to face. In October 1998, 28-year-old Daniel Reeves drove through heavy rain toward the old Grayson property on the edge of Black Hollow, Virginia. He worked for a small auction company that cleaned abandoned houses after owners died. Most jobs were simple: old furniture, dusty books, broken clocks, forgotten family photos. But the Grayson house felt different the moment he saw it. The massive Victorian home stood alone near the woods, hidden behind dead trees and rusted gates. Parts of the roof had collapsed, and ivy covered most of the walls like dark veins crawling over stone. Even in daylight, the house looked lifeless. Daniel parked his truck outside and checked the address again. Eleanor Grayson, he muttered softly. The name sounded familiar, though he could not remember why. Rain tapped against his jacket as he walked to the front porch. The wooden steps groaned loudly under his boots. When he unlocked the front door, a cold smell of dust and mold rushed out into the air. The inside looked frozen in time. Old furniture sat untouched beneath white sheets. A grandfather clock stood silent in the hallway. Family photographs covered the walls, but every face seemed strangely serious, almost frightened. Daniel shook off the uneasy feeling and got to work. For hours, he moved through the rooms making notes for the auction company. Most items were worthless: broken lamps, rotten chairs, cracked dishes. But one thing caught his attention. Every room contained portraits of children, not normal smiling portraits. These children looked stiff and uncomfortable, like they had been forced to sit still for hours. Some of the photos even showed their hands hidden behind their backs. By late evening, only the attic remained unchecked. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase. The attic door stuck halfway before finally opening with a loud crack. Dust floated heavily through the beam of light. The attic was packed with old trunks, covered furniture, and piles of yellow newspapers. Rain dripped slowly through a hole in the roof, somewhere above him. Then his flashlight stopped on something large standing against the far wall, a painting covered with a white cloth. Daniel walked closer carefully. The object was taller than him. He pulled away the cloth and instantly froze. The painting showed a woman sitting in a wooden chair with 3 young girls standing behind her. The woman wore a dark blue dress, and her face carried a cold, unreadable expression. The girls looked nearly identical except for the youngest, who appeared nervous. The painting itself was beautiful. Every detail looked incredibly real. But after several seconds, Daniel realized something was horribly wrong. The hands. He stepped closer. The mother's right hand rested on her lap. 6 fingers. The oldest daughter held her sister's hand gently. 6 fingers. The second daughter's fingers were long and strangely stitched near the knuckles. And the youngest girl kept both hands hidden behind her back, though one extra finger slightly peeked out from behind her dress. Daniel stared silently at the portrait while a chill spread across his body. "Okay," he whispered nervously. "That's creepy." He checked the bottom corner of the frame. Painted in tiny letters were the words, "Family is forever." Daniel carefully lifted the portrait away from the wall. Something scratched behind it. He turned the frame around. On the back, written in faded black ink, were 4 handwritten words, WEKUNDUEH. Daniel frowned. What happened to who? For a moment, the attic felt colder than before. A loud bang suddenly echoed downstairs. Daniel nearly dropped the portrait. He listened carefully. Silence. Probably the wind, he told himself. Still, his heartbeat quickened. trying to ignore the strange feeling growing inside him. Daniel carried the portrait downstairs and leaned it against the living room wall. Before leaving for the night, he snapped several photos to upload later for antique collectors. Back at his apartment, he posted the images onto an online history forum. Within minutes, comments appeared. "Where did you find this? Those hands look wrong. Is this from Black Hollow?" Then a private message arrived from someone named Mara77. The message was short. "Burn the portrait." Daniel rolled his eyes. Another message appeared seconds later. "Count the fingers carefully." Daniel zoomed into the image again. His stomach tightened immediately. The fingers were not painted normally. Some had scars. Some appeared sewn together. One finger on the mother's hand looked darker than the others, almost like it belonged to another person entirely. Then came the final message. "You need to leave that house." Daniel suddenly remembered why the name Eleanor Grayson sounded familiar. Years ago, when he was a child, his grandmother used to mention the Grayson family whenever children misbehaved. "Stay out after dark," she would warn, "or the Grayson woman will take you." At the time, Daniel thought it was only a scary story adults told children. But now, staring at the portrait on his computer screen, he wasn't so sure. Unable to sleep, Daniel searched Old Town records online. What he found made his blood run cold. Eleanor Grayson once had 3 daughters. But according to official records, only 2 were ever found after a house fire in 1952. The youngest daughter, Alice Grayson, disappeared completely at age 9. No body was ever discovered. And one final detail sat buried deep in the report. Alice Grayson had been born with a rare condition. She had 6 fingers on each hand. Daniel slowly looked back at the portrait photo glowing on his screen. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message from Mara77. This time it contained only one sentence. "She's still inside the house." Daniel barely slept after receiving the final message from Mara77. "She's still inside the house." The words repeated in his mind all night. By morning, rain clouds covered Black Hollow again. Daniel sat inside his truck outside the Grayson property, staring at the dark windows of the old house. Every instinct told him to walk away, but curiosity and fear pulled him back. He needed answers. The front door creaked open as he stepped inside once more. The house felt colder than before, almost alive. The silence inside pressed heavily against him. Daniel carried a flashlight, a small camera, and an old revolver his father once owned. He did not really believe he would need it, but the house made him uneasy. He went straight upstairs toward the attic. The portrait still leaned against the wall exactly where he left it. But something had changed. Daniel stopped breathing for a second. The youngest daughter's painted face looked different now. Last night she seemed nervous. Today she looked terrified. Her eyes appeared wider, as if she were trying to warn him. Daniel stepped closer slowly. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe lack of sleep was affecting him. Then he noticed fresh scratches on the attic floor beneath where the portrait had originally stood. Long, deep marks. Like heavy furniture had been dragged across the wood years ago. He knelt beside them carefully and brushed away layers of dust. Underneath lay a small iron ring attached to the floorboards. Daniel pulled it gently. A hidden trapdoor opened beneath him with a loud crack. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. Daniel aimed his flashlight down the opening. A narrow wooden ladder disappeared deep underground. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he heard it. Soft humming. A child's voice. The sound drifted upward slowly from somewhere below the house. Daniel's blood turned cold. The humming sounded old and broken, almost like someone repeating the same tune for decades. He nearly slammed the trapdoor shut and ran. But instead, against all logic, he grabbed the flashlight tighter and climbed down. The ladder creaked loudly under his weight. The deeper he descended, the colder the air became. Dirt walls surrounded him on both sides. Finally, his feet touched stone. The underground room was larger than he expected. Shelves lined the walls, covered with dusty jars and rotten boxes. A single rusty bed frame stood in one corner, beside a cracked teacup. Water dripped slowly from pipes overhead. Then Daniel noticed the shoes. Children's shoes. Dozens of pairs arranged carefully along one shelf. Tiny leather shoes, school shoes, Sunday church shoes, all different sizes. Daniel felt sick instantly. He moved his flashlight across the room and spotted old photographs scattered on a table. Most showed Eleanor Grayson standing beside children from the town. But one picture caught his attention immediately. It showed the same family from the portrait. Only this time the youngest daughter, Alice, looked frightened. Her hands were hidden behind her back, while Eleanor smiled coldly at the camera. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "She would not obey." Daniel swallowed hard. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The silence that followed felt even worse. Then, a soft movement behind him. Daniel spun around so quickly he nearly dropped the flashlight. Nothing, only darkness. But he could swear someone had been standing there seconds earlier. His breathing became faster. "Hello," he called weakly. No answer. He forced himself to continue searching. The flashlight beam moved across the stone walls until strange carvings appeared in the light. Dates. Names. Dozens of them scratched into the wall deeply. Some names were crossed out violently. At the very bottom sat one final name, Elise. Daniel quickly photographed everything. His hands shook so badly, he almost dropped the camera. Then his flashlight landed on something horrifying near the far wall. A wooden chair facing directly toward the stone. Leather straps hung from its arms. And above the chair, small bloody fingerprints stained the wall. Daniel stumbled backward in panic. That was when he heard a whisper. Very close. Right beside his ear. "She told me not to scream." Daniel turned violently, raising the revolver. Nobody stood there. The underground room remained empty. But now the humming had returned again. Closer this time, almost directly beneath the floor. Daniel ran for the ladder. He climbed upward so quickly the wood cracked beneath him. He slammed the trapdoor shut and backed away across the attic floor, breathing hard. For several minutes he simply sat there shaking. Then he noticed something else. The portrait. It had moved. Daniel clearly remembered leaving it against the left wall. Now it stood facing the trapdoor, as if watching him. "No," he whispered nervously. "No way." He grabbed the painting immediately and carried it downstairs toward the front door. But as he reached the hallway, he froze again. A smell filled the air. Fresh cigarette smoke. Someone else was inside the house. Daniel slowly looked toward the kitchen. A shadow moved behind the doorway. Tall, thin, gone within seconds. "Who's there?" Daniel shouted. No response, only silence. Then suddenly, "Binge!" The front door slammed shut by itself. Daniel jumped backward in terror. The old chandelier above him swung slightly. And from somewhere upstairs, a child began laughing softly. Daniel rushed outside moments later, nearly tripping down the porch stairs. Rain poured heavily around him as he reached his truck. He locked the doors immediately and tried to calm his breathing. Then his phone buzzed. Another message from Mara 77. "You opened it." Daniel stared at the screen. A second message arrived instantly. "No, she knows you can hear her." Daniel drove through the rain with shaking hands. The Grayson house disappeared behind him in the darkness, but the feeling of being watched stayed with him the entire way home. The child's laughter still echoed inside his mind. When he finally reached his apartment, he locked every door and window before placing the portrait face down against the living room wall. He did not want to look at it anymore. But around midnight, Daniel heard something strange. A soft scratching sound. At first, he thought it was coming from outside. Maybe tree branches scraping against the building, but the sound continued steadily. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Slowly, Daniel turned toward the portrait. The noise was coming from behind the canvas. His chest tightened. He grabbed a kitchen knife and stepped closer carefully. The scratching stopped the moment he reached it. For several seconds, the apartment remained completely silent. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Daniel answered nervously. Hello. At first, only static filled the line. Then came a weak female voice. She took them. The voice sounded old, tired, almost broken. Who is this? Daniel asked quickly. No answer, only breathing. Then the woman whispered one final sentence. She keeps the fingers. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone in horror. He immediately called back, but the number no longer existed. Sleep became impossible after that. Instead, Daniel spread every newspaper, clipping and photograph across his table. He carefully compared the family portrait to the newspaper image of Eleanor Grayson, standing beside the missing surgeon, Dr. Samuel Vance. Something suddenly caught his attention. In the newspaper photo, Eleanor's right hand had only 5 fingers, but in the portrait painted 1 year later, she clearly had 6. Daniel felt cold all over. The next morning, he returned to Black Hollow and visited the town library. Most records about the Grayson family had been forgotten or buried away in storage boxes. After hours of searching, he uncovered an old hospital report from 1951. The report belonged to Eleanor Grayson. According to the file, Eleanor suffered a terrible accident involving farm machinery. Doctors were forced to amputate her right ring finger completely. Daniel stared at the document silently. So how did it come back? He whispered. You're asking the wrong question. Daniel turned sharply. An elderly man stood behind him wearing a long brown coat and holding a cane. His face looked tired, but his eyes stayed fixed on the hospital file. My name is Harold Pike, the man said quietly. I was deputy sheriff here in 1952. Daniel immediately recognized the name from several old police reports. Harold sat down across from him slowly. You've been inside the Grayson house, he said. It was not a question. Daniel hesitated before nodding. Harold's expression darkened instantly. You should have stayed away from that place. Daniel showed him the portrait photos and explained everything. The hidden basement, the children's shoes, the messages from Mara de 77. But when Harold saw the 6 fingers in the portrait, his face lost color. I knew it, he whispered. Knew what? Daniel asked. Harold leaned closer carefully. Years ago, children started disappearing around Black Hollow. Not many, one every few years. The town blamed drifters or kidnappers passing through. He paused, but some of us suspected Eleanor Grayson. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Harold continued. Then Dr. Samuel Vance disappeared. Daniel pulled out the newspaper clipping immediately. You knew him? Harold nodded slowly. He was a surgeon from Richmond, smart man, quiet. He arrived in town suddenly and spent months visiting the Grayson house. Why? Harold looked toward the window uneasily. Because Eleanor believed human body parts carried memory. Daniel blinked in confusion. What? She thought memories lived inside flesh, Harold explained. She believed replacing lost body parts with pieces from another person could keep souls alive forever. Daniel stared at him silently. That's insane. Wes, Harold said softly. And dangerous. Harold then revealed something nobody else knew. Before disappearing, Dr. Vance secretly contacted the sheriff's office. He claimed Eleanor forced him to perform surgeries inside the basement beneath her house. Surgeries involving children. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. Harold opened an old evidence folder from his coat. Inside sat several faded photographs and handwritten notes. One sketch made Daniel's blood run cold. It showed a human hand with 6 fingers stitched together from different hands. Underneath, Dr. Vance had written, "Prototype successful." Daniel nearly dropped the page. "No," he whispered. Harold nodded grimly. "We believe Eleanor replaced her missing finger." Daniel suddenly remembered the stitched skin in the portrait. The different colors. The scars. The fingers had not been painted strangely. They were real. Then Harold showed him another file. A missing child report from 1949. Rebecca Moore, age 7, born with 6 fingers. Daniel's heart pounded harder. She disappeared 2 years before Alice, Harold said quietly. A horrible realization spread through Daniel's mind. Eleanor had not chosen victims randomly. She was collecting fingers. Suddenly Daniel's phone buzzed loudly on the table. Another message from Marita 77. This time it included a photograph. Daniel opened it carefully. His blood froze instantly. The image showed the portrait hanging inside his apartment. But Daniel had left it face down before coming to Black Hollow. And in the photograph, the mother's painted hand looked different now. 7 fingers. A second message appeared underneath. "She's improving." Before Daniel could react, another text arrived. "Look behind the canvas." Daniel stared at the phone in silence. Then Harold asked quietly, "What's wrong?" Daniel slowly turned the screen toward him. For the first time since meeting him, the old detective looked truly afraid. And then he whispered the words Daniel would never forget. "She's still adding to it." Daniel and Harold drove back to Daniel's apartment in complete silence. Rain hammered the windshield, while the old detective gripped the photograph tightly in his hands. Neither man wanted to say what both were thinking. Someone had entered Daniel's apartment, or something had. When they arrived, Daniel immediately noticed the front door slightly open. His stomach dropped. "I locked it," he whispered. Harold slowly pulled out his revolver. "Stay behind me." The apartment was dark except for the flickering television Daniel forgot to turn off earlier. Everything looked normal at first glance. Then Daniel saw the portrait. It no longer rested against the wall. Now it stood upright in the center of the living room, facing the front door, waiting. Harold moved closer carefully, while Daniel's hands trembled beside him. The painting had changed again. The mother's smile looked wider now, and her right hand, 7 fingers, clearly visible, perfectly painted. "Oh my God," Daniel whispered. Harold stepped closer until his face nearly touched the canvas. Then he noticed something strange near the bottom corner. Fresh paint. Still wet. Daniel backed away slowly. "That's impossible." Suddenly, a loud sound came from inside the walls. "Thump." Both men froze. Another thump followed. Then scratching. Something moving behind the apartment walls. Harold raised the revolver immediately. "Who's there?" The scratching stopped. Silence filled the room again. Then Daniel remembered the message. "Look behind the canvas." He carefully grabbed the portrait frame while Harold aimed the flashlight. Nails had been hammered recently into the back wood. Dozens of them. Daniel pulled one free carefully. A folded piece of paper slid out from inside the frame. His hands shook as he opened it. The paper contained only one sentence written in faded pencil. "She luves below the rotes." Harold's face hardened instantly. "The woods," he muttered. Within an hour, they returned to the Grayson property with 2 local officers. Night covered Black Hollow in thick fog, and the forest behind the house looked endless in the darkness. Harold led them toward an old stone, well hidden deep among the trees. This used to connect to underground tunnels during the Civil War, he explained. Most were sealed decades ago. Daniel shined his flashlight downward. The well was empty except for rusted ladder rungs leading into darkness, and faintly, very faintly, came the sound of humming. The same child's tune. One officer cursed quietly. Harold climbed down first. Daniel followed with shaking hands. The tunnel beneath the well smelled damp and rotten. Dirt walls stretched endlessly ahead, while roots twisted through the ceiling like dead fingers. As they walked deeper underground, strange markings began appearing on the walls. Tiny handprints. Children's handprints. Some painted red, some black. Then they found the first door. It was made of metal, covered in scratches from the inside. Daniel pushed it open slowly. The room beyond nearly made him vomit. Glass jars filled dusty shelves from floor to ceiling. Inside floated human fingers preserved in yellow liquid. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each jar carried names and dates written carefully in white ink. Rebecca Moore, Timothy Vale, Sarah Pike. Harold suddenly stopped breathing. Daniel turned toward him. "What's wrong?" Harold stared at one jar in horror. Inside floated a tiny finger wearing a silver ring. The label read, SRH, 1951. Harold's voice broke instantly. "My daughter." Daniel froze. Harold had never told him his daughter disappeared. The old detective stepped backward slowly, tears filling his eyes. She was 6 years old. Suddenly, another noise echoed deeper in the tunnel. Footsteps, running, fast. The officers chased the sound immediately while Daniel and Harold followed behind. The tunnel twisted sharply beneath the woods until it opened into a massive underground chamber. And there, standing beneath a hanging lantern, was an old woman, thin pale, wild gray hair hanging around her face. She wore a torn nightgown stained with dirt, but Daniel noticed her hands immediately. 6 fingers on each one. The woman stared silently at them for several seconds before speaking. "You shouldn't have opened the portrait." Her voice sounded weak and cracked from age. Harold lowered his revolver slowly. "Alice." The woman smiled sadly. Yes. Daniel could barely process what he was seeing. Alice Grayson had been missing for nearly 50 years, yet somehow she stood alive before them. "You survived down here?" Daniel asked softly. Alice nodded once. "She kept me hidden." "Your mother?" Alice looked toward the darkness behind her. "She said the world would never understand what she was building." Daniel stepped closer carefully. The fingers, the surgeries. Alice slowly raised her trembling hands into the lantern light. Every extra finger showed scars, where skin had been stitched together. "My mother believed memories could survive inside flesh," Alice whispered. "She thought stolen body parts carried pieces of the soul." Harold's face filled with anger. "She murdered children." Alice closed her eyes painfully. At first she only experimented on the dead, but later, her voice cracked. Later she needed living tissue. Daniel felt sick. Alice then revealed the horrifying truth. Dr. Samuel Vance never wanted to help Eleanor. She blackmailed him into performing the surgeries. When he threatened to expose her, Eleanor killed him inside the tunnels. "But why keep you alive?" Daniel asked. Alice's expression darkened. "Because I was perfect." She lifted her 6-fingered hands again. "I was born different. Mother believed I could survive the process better than the others." Suddenly, Daniel noticed something behind Alice in the darkness. A massive object covered by cloth. His heart pounded. Slowly, he pulled the cloth away. Another portrait, much larger than the first. This one showed Eleanor standing beside dozens of faceless children. And every child had extra fingers. But the most terrifying detail stood in the center of the painting. a tall black figure made entirely of stitched hands. Underneath it, written in dark paint, were the words, "The Family JRW's Farviart." Then the lantern above them suddenly went out, and from somewhere deep in the tunnels, children began whispering together in the darkness. The whispers echoed through the underground tunnel like voices trapped inside the walls. Children. Dozens of them. Soft voices speaking over one another in the darkness. Daniel could not understand the words clearly, but one sentence repeated again and again. "Look at the hands." The officers switched on their flashlights immediately, their beams cutting through the black tunnel. Alice stood perfectly still beneath the dead lantern, her pale face empty with fear. Harold raised his revolver nervously. "Who's down here?" he shouted. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence returned so suddenly it hurt Daniel's ears. Then came a loud metallic slam somewhere deeper underground. One of the officers moved toward the sound carefully, but Alice suddenly grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't go farther," she whispered. The officer looked down at her stitch fingers wrapped around his sleeve. "Why?" Alice's eyes filled with terror. "Because she built another room." Daniel felt cold all over. "What room?" Alice slowly pointed deeper into the tunnel system. "My mother called it the memory room." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Harold stepped forward. "Take us there." Alice hesitated at first. Then, without another word, she picked up the lantern and led them deeper underground. The tunnel narrowed as they walked. Old roots pushed through the ceiling, and water dripped steadily onto the dirt floor below. Strange drawings covered the walls, black figures with extra hands standing around children. The deeper they went, the worse the smell became. Rotting wood, mold, something else beneath it, something metallic blood. After several minutes, the tunnel ended at a massive steel door hidden behind hanging roots. Dozens of locks covered its surface, but all of them had already been broken from the inside. Harold looked at Alice carefully. "You escaped from here." Alice nodded weakly. "After Mother died." Daniel noticed deep scratch marks covering the door. Not on the outside, inside. His chest tightened. Harold slowly pushed the door open. The room beyond was enormous and horrifying. Daniel froze instantly. Portraits covered every wall from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of them. Children, families, missing people from Black Hollow stretching back decades. Every painting shared one terrible detail. Extra fingers. Some subjects had 6 fingers, others had 7. A few had entire hands stitched together unnaturally. At the center of the